Tirtha Prabhu heard the Hare Krishna mantra in 68, in the very, very early years in New York. And after a while, he found certain cards with Hare Krishna Mahamantra, which was written in it. In 71, after joining the Peace Corps, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu went to India as a teacher, and he met Srila Prabhupada there. Brahma Tirtha Prabhu also has a scientific background, and he is currently serves as the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Education, where a group of Vaishnava scholars is researching the intersections of science and religion. He also serves as a USA State Advisor on environmental protection. So Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, he had a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada at these early days, and today we will ask him kindly share with us his experience of Krishna consciousness from his interviews with Srila Prabhupada. So Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, my first question to you, you asked question to Srila Prabhupada, and we will ask questions to you with your permission. Could you share with us, please, what sparked your interest in Krishna consciousness? Did you have any disappointments maybe in this world, or were you just an inquisitive person looking for the truth?
You asked a very important question. And when I read Back to Godhead magazine, some of my favorite stories are how people had the change of heart to become engaged in devotional service. These stories, to me, every last one of them is a miracle. Mine began when I was 10 years old. And I had this fascination about India. I wanted to go to India. I don't know why. My guess is previous life, but I kept thinking I had to go to India. I was brought up in a middle-class Jewish family. When I was like 16 years old, Prabhupada's Gita was not published, and frankly, I never heard of Prabhupada. But I read Franklin Edgerton's Gita. Now, Franklin Edgerton is interesting. He's a good scholar and a 1,000% Mayavadi. So his conclusion was, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, meaning you are God. But I thought, boy, if I am God, the world is in trouble. I mean, I couldn't think of anything worse for the planet than myself being God. So I rejected that. Then in college, I read Dr. Radha Krishna's Gita. Now, that brings us to a mystical story. And I've given the story on other podcasts, but I'm sure some of you hadn't heard it, and people tell me they like the story. So we'll get to that a little later. But in college, I read the Radha Krishna's Gita in a philosophy class. And I asked the instructor to explain one verse. Now, I only read in English, no Sanskrit or anything. I never heard Sanskrit. I didn't know any Sanskrit. But the verse in Sanskrit is api chat sudacharo. Even if one commits the most abominable activities, if he's engaged in devotional service, he's to be considered saintly because he's rightly situated. Rough translation. And that verse really bothered me because in the West, we're very black and white thinkers. Either somebody is good or bad. And those were the anti-Vietnam War protest days. So on every college campus, we were protesting. And so we saw the government as bad, the protesters as good, but some of the protesters were horrible people, womanizers, drunkards. But I was still thinking black and white, so I was very bewildered. And then I was in New York in the famous Greenwich Village, and I saw something. And in Greenwich Village in those days, there were many show-offs, exhibitionists, people who just dressed as weird as they could to get attention. And then I saw something beyond anything I'd ever seen. Jayadvaita Brahmachari then, and a chanting party wearing these odd clothes, dhotis, and their socks were different colors, which was unusual. And they were chanting. And I thought these people are either the number one show-offs, or these people are above it all, transcendental. I didn't know which. But they were chanting, and I got a mantra card, and the mantra stuck in my brain, and I couldn't get it out. So I said, okay, I'll start chanting. I went to 26 Second Avenue to try to meet the devotees, and they had moved, but they didn't put any sign in the window. Finally, there was no Google to find things. 6 months later, I found where they'd moved, which was just down on Second Avenue, just down the street. And so I went there, and they had moved again. So it took me about a year to find them. And then when I went in the temple for the first time on 439 Henry Street, I felt like I had gone to a foreign planet. The smells were different, very nice. The food was different, very nice. Everyone was dressed different, spoke differently. I had to pinch myself and think, what planet am I on? But it was a nice planet, but it's so different. Finally, I said, I'd like to buy one of your books. So they sold me the only book they had then. Gita wasn't there. Imagine if your very, very first book on Krishna was the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Just try to think your first book. So the book smelled like incense. I said, now I'll find out what's going on with the Hare Krishna mantra, what this is about. During that time, after Prabhupada, many gurus started coming to America looking for money. And there was money to be found. So there was, some of these gurus were really weird people. So I didn't want to get caught up with one of them. So I said, well, let me read this book and try to understand. So I'm starting to read Nectar of Devotion, but it's impossible for me. I couldn't understand anything. But I kept on chanting Hare Krishna. Finally, I made a decision. Look, if I want to know if Krishna consciousness is bona fide or one of these weird cults from India, the only way I'm going to know is to fulfill my childhood dream and go to India. So I applied for a government program to become a teacher in India. A government program was very hard to get in, but if you got in, it was all over the world. And you wanted India, you surely got India, because very few volunteered for India because it was more austere than even Africa in those days. Now, I grew up with a disability. growing up with a disability was one of the biggest blessings of my life. You may wonder, why would a disability be a blessing? I am partially blind, so I have no depth perception. So the one eye doesn't work. Some operation when I was a baby was done and the doctor made a mistake. Blessing, because when in those days growing up in the suburbs of New York, everyone played ball. You played baseball, basketball, football, soccer ball. Everyone just played ball. Well, without good vision, it's impossible to play ball. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't find out till I was 19 what the problem was. So Krishna arranged that I couldn't be very social. So I spent a lot of time in the woods thinking and praying and trying to understand one topic that really bothered me. And this bothered me since I can remember. And that is, how can someone die? Something inside me said, you can't really die. No one can die, but people were dying. And it was very bewildering to me. And there were no answers. You know, if I ask a spiritual teacher, they say, such is life, but no answers. So I wanted to know. So I read philosophy and studied and went in the woods. So when I went to India, by that time, even though I was just, I think when I went to India, I was 21 or 22 years old, very young, but I had thought about things more than most 22-year-olds due to disability. Now I'm giving the long version of the story here, but it gets fun in a few minutes. So when I was in India, I would ask people, do you chant Hare Krishna? And the answer I would get, I want to find out if it was bona fide. And the answer I would get would be, yes, yes. And they shake their head, it looks like no, and they're saying yes. And I have no idea what the real answer is. And I would go to the temples and even the mosques and say, why are you praying? And everyone was praying as if it was Amazon.com. I don't know if you have Amazon in Russia, but we have it in America where you go to a web page, you pay your money, and the next day a package comes. I'm sure there's something like that in Russia. So it was like that. People went to the temple, they gave their donation, and they expected their package to be delivered the next day, maybe rain, a dowry, something. And I was thinking, this is not very good. I wanted philosophy, not ritual. So I was in Calcutta. My assignment was an overnight train ride from Calcutta. So I'd go to Calcutta to visit a large city. And I lived in a very rural, backward place. So sometimes I would go to Calcutta, and then I saw a sign, Hare Krishna Festival. And there was the amazing, wonderful, and one of my dear friends, Giriraj Swami, Brahmacharya, then speaking. And he was giving this brilliant lecture. Even though it was 1971, I can still remember it. It was so good. And it made so much sense. I said, finally, somebody is making sense. And then I would start, whenever I went to Calcutta, I would go to the temple. And one time when I was there in November 1971, Prabhupada was there. Then something very interesting happened. I got a chance to be stupid. I was invited in Prabhupada's room, and I had just come from Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya is the place where the Buddha received enlightenment. And I had gone there and sat under a sapling of the very tree the Buddha had sat under. Of course, nothing happened. I didn't get enlightened, nothing happened. And then when I saw Prabhupada, I asked this question: why not Buddhism? Why Hinduism? So that was my very first, very stupid question. Now, here's how Prabhupada answered that question. And you'll see why it was a stupid question. Prabhupada did not want to discuss Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism. He didn't want to discuss any ism. He wanted to discuss philosophy. So immediately he says to me, so what did the Buddha say? He wanted to say, what was the philosophical point? And I said, well, he had an eightfold noble path and a fourfold this, or was it 8 of this and 4 of that, or 4 of this and 8 of that? And finally I said to him, I can't remember what the Buddha said. He said, well, then why are you asking? Then I shut my mouth and said, I'll be a listener. I said, I no more stupid questions. He's obviously a saintly person. I'll sit here and learn. So I shut my mouth. A fool, Prabhupada used to say, only reveals himself when he speaks. So I knew when to keep quiet. Then I was in Calcutta in February 72, and I ran into some devotees. And there had just been a big war between India and Pakistan, a huge war. And Pakistan lost. At that time, America had favored Pakistan and the Soviet Union had favored India. Cold War politics. You're all Russian, so you all know this history. Even to this day, remnants of that history exist. So America, it was getting difficult to be working for the American government in India, even though I was only earning $50 a month, very, very small pay. And I thought, when I saw the devotees in Calcutta, they said they're doing food relief for Bangladesh refugees from the war. I said, I need a break. People are accusing me of being a spy. I wasn't. It was difficult to be an American in India after the war. So I went up to Mayapur. I didn't know what Mayapur was. I didn't know Prabhupada would even be there. I just went up to help serve food to refugees. I thought that would be a nice thing to do. When I got there, there was about 70 devotees there, mostly Western, some Indian. There were no buildings. There was the Bhajan Kutir, which you can see here. It's kept all these years. And that was the only building there. There was a tent for men, a tent for women, and a pandal tent. So I started serving prasadam, and one devotee, Tejas, said, would you like to see Prabhupada? I said, sure. But this time I thought, I won't be so stupid. So I went in to see Prabhupada. Now, this part was not recorded, unfortunately. The book begins after our second session. The first session, there was a shortage of cassette tapes. So Shama Sundar, Prabhupada's secretary, only recorded when it was very important. So Prabhupada asked who I was, what I was doing. I'm a teacher, and we talked about why I was there and just normal, as I don't know how this word translates into Russian, but normal pleasantries. He greeted me very warmly. I was very nervous. Then I went back to helping feed khichdi to the refugees, and Prabhupada called me back in the hut. And Shama Sundar thought this was a good conversation, and he hit the record button. And that's where the book begins, in session 2. And then Prabhupada started discussing with me. And then the miracle happened. Remember before I told you there was a verse of Pichet Sudarsharo. Well, this gets very mystical. So Prabhupada quoted the verse to me in Sanskrit. Now remember, I knew no Sanskrit. I could speak Hindi, but I knew no Sanskrit. And he quoted it to me. And then he says, have you read it? And I say, the Sanskrit I don't know, but the English I do. And I told him what the verse was. The very first verse Prabhupada quoted to me was the only verse I knew in English in the entire Bhagavad Gita. And it gets more mystical. The last verse Prabhupada quoted to me was the same verse. Now, later on, that ties into my ISKCON Resolve service as a mediator, because I have to look at things with Samadarshana, equal vision. So Prabhupada somehow knew I would end up that place. And that's the very first and the last verse he quoted to me, the only one I knew. So then Prabhupada and I started, that's the background of how this happened. And then we started discussing this and that. And then something miraculous happened. Some of you may have met the wonderful Yamuna. She sings Govinda prayers in every ISKCON temple in the world every day at the opening of the deities. Yamuna was one of the most lovely and loving persons I have ever met on the planet. If you have not read her biography, it is 2 volumes that is worth reading. So it was Gaur Purnima, 1972, February 28th, I believe. And Yamuna comes to me with tears in her eyes. Her eyes are full of tears. And she comes, she says, Prabhupada is spending every minute with you. Because he would call me into his Bhajan Kutir. This was after 2 days, every 2-3 times a day. There were all these young devotees were there, and they were all very anxious and zealous to preach. So Prabhupada kept me with him all day to protect me from his own people, I think, because they were very enthusiastic. And me, I was just the new guy. So Yamuna again said to me, you are so lucky. You are so fortunate. Prabhupada's giving you all his time. Because I was the last devotee other than Bhakti Charu Swami, who Prabhupada personally spent a lot of time with to bring someone to Krishna. By that time, Prabhupada had so many thousands and thousands of disciples that it's like if President Putin was walking down the street, you couldn't walk up to him. He's in we call it in America, a bubble. He's surrounded by guards and secretaries and staff and assistants. So you can't see him. So Prabhupada by then had so many thousands of disciples, but I was lucky. I was in Mayapur, very, very lucky. So Yamuna was telling me how lucky I am. And there's no light. Mayapur had no buildings, nothing, but it was a full moon, Gaur Purnima. So the tears were glowing in her eyes from the moon. She said, "You are so lucky. Prabhupada is giving you all of his mercy, all of his time. You don't know how fortunate you are." And she said it with such love and conviction that it scared me. And then I went off behind the pandal tent and just collapsed on the ground crying. And I don't cry very much, but I was didn't know what to do, because my whole conversation with Prabhupada then was theoretical, just learning more philosophy. It wasn't about me as a person. But Prabhupada and Yamuna are radical personalists. My god sister, Rambaru, came up with this term, radical personalists, that we are extremely personal. I love the term. So Yamuna, Prabhupada, radical personalists. So the next day, Prabhupada called me in his hut. And the first thing I say to him is, "I have to leave now and go back to my teaching. Thank you very much. It was nice knowing you. Goodbye." Something like that. I said it politely. And Prabhupada turns to me in a very serious voice, but with a smile. He says, "Do not talk, Leave, leave." And then he goes, he says, "Do not talk, leave, talk, live, Live." And he spelt again. So don't talk, leave, talk, live. And I said to him, "You want me to stay longer?" He goes, "Yes." And I said, "I'll stay." And then he said the sweetest possible words he could say to me. 2 words. Any of you have a dog? Don't be shy. I have a dog. Any of you have a dog? You can raise your hand. Any hands? Okay, we have a dog. Somebody's not too shy. Bhaktivedanta Thakur had a dog named Tiger. Ramananda Roy had a dog. Krishna had a dog. Many illustrious devotees have had dogs. And so Prabhupada said the 2 sweetest words he could say to me. Just what are the sweetest words you say to your dog? Good boy. Good boy. So Prabhupada said to me, good boy. And when he called me a good boy, I knew I was his dog. And so then the rest of the conversation becomes, in perfect questions, much more personal, about my struggle with understanding the regulative principles, my struggle with other issues. It became very personal. So the mood of our conversation changed at that point in time due to the mercy of Yamuna. And before Yamuna passed on, a few times I was able to thank her for what she did for me. So I was very fortunate I could thank her.
Asking questions about Krishna is quite hard. Asking questions about ourselves is quite easy and common. What does it mean to ask a perfect question? So we find that in Srimad Bhagavatam, on the first canto, second chapter and first verse, we find a verse where Sutta Goswami thanks the Naimisharanya sages for very perfect questions. And he uses term samprashna, perfect question, samprashna. And could you tell us which questions are perfect and which are not? What we should ask our teacher and what not? That is my question to you.
That is a perfect question. That is a very, very good question. And A good question is done in the mood of the Gita. Approach a spiritual master, inquire submissively, render service, and the self-realized soul can share the truth. He has darshana. He has seen the truth and he can share it. I didn't even know that verse really. I accidentally approached Prabhupada with that mood. So the way to ask questions is submissively and sincerely. I'll give you a good example. Let's say Krishna says, I am the taste of water. Now, a bad question is Krishna really the taste of water? A good question is, how is Krishna the taste of water? So a good question is not challenging, yet it's increasing our knowledge. If we look at the Srimad Bhagavatam, we will find almost the entire Bhagavatam is questions. Just like there's something called a Russian egg, in which you have, it's a piece of jewelry, and you have one egg, and inside it there's a smaller one, and then a smaller one. Do you know what I mean by that? There's something the Tsar used to have. They call it a Russian egg. It's a piece of jewelry, and then you have a big one, and then inside it there's smaller, and then smaller and smaller. And that's what the Bhagavatam is like. There's big questions, Sukadev Goswami and Sutta Goswami, and then as you go down, almost the whole Bhagavatam is questions and answers. And somebody is telling a story. Well, long ago, this sage asked this question, or Narada Muni met King Prachinabarishat, and King Prachinabarishat needed to know the answer to a question. So Narada Muni told him an allegory, and it begins, Raja, O king, once there was a king. Now Narada Muni is talking about King Prachinabarishat, but he couldn't bear to hear it, so he tells him a story. And the whole Bhagavatam is like that. Some are real stories, some are metaphorical stories like King Prachinabarishat or parts of the 5th canto. So the way to inquire is with some faith, some submission. I don't know everything, but this person, my Guru Dev, my mentor, he knows a little more than me. So let me ask submissively, but ask. Doesn't mean you have blind faith. Doesn't mean you just believe everything you're told, but it means you have enough faith to know this person knows more than me. Like when you go to the university, on your first day of school, the professor tells you an equation. You don't raise your hand and say, Professor, you're wrong. I know better than you. It's just the etiquette. So the good questions are those asked to help us understand. Many things are paradoxical. By paradox, I mean not real, but apparent contradiction. And every religion uses the paradox method because it makes us think deeper. Prabhupada once said, if people come on sentiment, they will leave on sentiment. He wanted people to read Prabhupada's biggest frustration, I think, was that his own followers were not reading his books. So, and when we read, we're not going to understand. We inquire. And the way to inquire is in association, not alone. So when I don't understand something, I'll write or read Dynanamraj, say, I don't understand this verse. It makes no sense to me. I can't figure it out. And then we discuss it, and then I understand it, and then it's so much deeper. I hope that answered your question. It's a very, very important question you asked. One of the most important questions you can ask.
Thank you a lot for your answer. If you permit, I would like to show devotees this Bhajan Kutir of Srila Prabhupada, which you just now were talking about. Let me check. It's here. That is first Gaura Purnima festival, which was conducted at 27 February 72 in Mayapur. It was only rice fields and few tents, and here Srila Prabhupada given a lecture.
I was there. I was shy, so I would sit in back. One time I was in New Orleans and Prabhupada was sitting up front. So I went in the back of the temple room and I just sat down kind of in the corner. And then somebody said, move up. So I thought I was blocking the door, so I moved up. But I didn't realize that Prabhupada was calling me. And then somebody said, move up. So I moved up a little more. And then Brahmananda said, come here. Well, Brahmananda was a big, powerful devotee. When he said, come here, you didn't walk, you run. So I immediately went up front and Prabhupada said, sit here next on the floor, right next to me. Prabhupada was so affectionate. But I was inclined to sit in back, and Prabhupada a few times made me sit in front.
How has your understanding of science changed since meeting with Srila Prabhupada? And what Srila Prabhupada himself wanted in the field of preaching Krishna consciousness in a rational or scientific way, how Kridananda Maharaj very often tell in a rational presentation of Krishna consciousness. I know that 1 month before Prabhupada's departure, you together with another devotees, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu and others, you held a scientific conference in Vrindavan, and you even discussed it with Prabhupada. Could you please tell us about Srila Prabhupada's vision and desire on that issue? Thank you.
I will. That's me in the middle. This is called changing body exhibit. Prabhupada challenged me on science. I said knowing science can help us reach a spiritual platform. But he challenged me. He said, if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. So then what Prabhupada taught me is first I need to understand philosophically certain points, such as the difference between body and soul. Then I could go back to science. And the reason to go back to science changed. I wasn't using science to give me higher knowledge. I'm using science to share higher knowledge. It's not the same thing. Because I'm not going to figure out who is God, who I am in a laboratory. Because in a laboratory, I'm working with things less than consciousness. And I'm using the wrong tools. I can't use a thermometer to tell me if an airplane wing is experiencing metal fatigue. It's the wrong instrument. You use an X-ray for that. If I have a broken bone, I don't stick a thermometer. I go to an X-ray machine. So you need the right tools. So the right tools to understand what's greater than us is service. To understand things less than us, we can control it. So I learned that. Meanwhile, we live in a world, Prabhupada's first book was Easy Journey to Other Planets, and Prabhupada praised the scientist. Then he said they have a pinprick, they're missing philosophy. So what I learned is we walk on two legs. One leg is physical, and the other leg is metaphysical. If we only walk on the physical leg and remove the metaphysics, you cannot get very far on one leg. How far can you get just hopping on one leg? Two legs is what we need. So, as far as the science goes, my attitude, I understood that we need philosophy and science together. Yet, there are science experiments and scientific matters that we can use to reach the intelligent class of people. One of our Bhaktivedanta Institute scientists, Murli Gopal, has twice been to Russia, worked with Nari and Bhaktivedanta Swami and others to help start scientific outreach in Russia. And as the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, I am always there to help in Russia in any way I can. It's our business to encourage intelligent people to understand Krishna consciousness. I'll give you an example. If we present, when we're dealing with people who are very geared towards science, and we know Russians are very, very scientific minded with many great brains, then we have to present Krishna consciousness in language that they will understand and appreciate. So at the Bhaktivedanta Institute, that's what we work on. Same philosophy, but we're presenting it in terms that they'll understand. One time, Prabhupada was discussing with Srila Damodar Maharaj in Washington, D.C. And Prabhupada said, look, I do not know the terms you know. So you have to present it in your own language because I cannot speak in scientific terms. That's not my training. That was a very humble statement by Prabhupada. And so we're not changing anything, but what I learned and what changed for me is that science would give me the answers. No, science and philosophy need to be combined. I hope that answers your question.
We know that you're one of the leaders of ISKCON Conflict Resolution Office. Could you tell us how Prabhupada resolved conflicts and contradictions? And more general question, how to maintain the unity and cooperation in Krishna consciousness? So it's next question for you.
Amala Chandra, your own questions could make a book, Perfect Questions. They're such good questions. So, I wish I could give perfect answers, but I'll do my best. It's natural for there to be conflict. I mean, it's just natural. Everyone's individual. We have false ego. Prabhupada said the main business for the GBC was to deal with one issue: unity in diversity. How to have unity and diversity. So the core siddhanta we can't change, but the details do change. In Rupa Goswami says in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that there are principles and details of devotional service. Unfortunately, we fight over the details, and not just us. I mediate in Christian churches and other places, and it's the same problem. When we're neophyte, we fight over details. And we really need to rise above that. The way Prabhupada dealt with it is sometime when I first met Prabhupada the first time, two devotees this is in Calcutta in 1971, two devotees were in the back of the room arguing. And I was very bewildered. I heard that this is the guru, who's Jagat Guru. Why would disciples be arguing when they could just ask Prabhupada the answer? Prabhupada's 10 feet away. How could they be arguing when he's 10 feet away? Later on, I found out one of the devotees was about to leave Krishna consciousness. He had broken his vows and was having trouble. If Prabhupada gave him instruction, then he would commit two offenses. One, he was violating the principles. And if Prabhupada gave him instructions, then he would be disobeying the orders of the guru. So Prabhupada was so intelligent. He knew when to say something and when not to. Now, if you're in Russia, you have conflicts. We've been training mediators all over the world, mediators and ombudsman. Ombudsman means conflict resolver. My partner and best friend, Raja Bihari, does the training. And the idea is when people do not trust one another, if they trust the mediator, then the mediator can bring some peace. And Prabhupada really wanted us to be not overly fight. Naturally, like a husband and wife, sometimes there'll be disagreement, but that should not mean divorce. It means people just disagree. We're all human, we all do that. Prabhupada understood it. Prabhupada himself would sometimes speak harsh about his godbrothers to protect us, because some of his godbrothers were very supporting of Prabhupada, and some of them were frankly very critical of Prabhupada. And to protect his young, innocent disciples from being influenced, Prabhupada would sometimes have to speak strongly about his godbrothers to protect us. And I was there and watched this, and I knew he had to do that. Yet, before Prabhupada left the planet, he apologized to all of them. He said, this is not very important. He offered his apologies. Prabhupada did not need to apologize. He did nothing wrong. So Prabhupada was setting the example of how to take a humble position. Now, I'll give another example. We had a temple president in New York. And he was a sannyas, then he got married. And Prabhupada said, that's okay, and even performed the wedding ceremony. But his wife was a crazy lady. And at one point, she even tried to offer chicken to Radha Govinda. If you can imagine such a horrific thing. So 3 devotees, Gopal Krishna Maharaj, Atreya Rishi, and Gopijana Vallabha, stood in front of the door and told the president, we're not letting you back in the temple. You're in Maya. And Prabhupada was very proud of them that they did this, and very proud of the junior devotees who, in spite of all the Maya, still stuck to their service and didn't leave. And he chastised the senior devotees who did not try to stop the nonsense. So each of us has our own role. So if I'm in a temple and the temple president is drinking vodka. Oh, it's Russia. I have to say vodka. He's drinking vodka, and it's not for medicinal purposes. Now, what am I to do? If I'm a junior devotee, I still do my service. I don't leave. If I'm a senior devotee, I have to say something and put a stop to it. So each of us has a different role to play. And Prabhupada, when I watched him with conflict resolution, he made sure each of us, we had to understand what our particular role was. So when I was a young devotee, if I saw Maya, I didn't think it was not Maya, but if it was my role to fix it, I tried to fix it. If it wasn't, I told my seniors, this is not right. But I didn't make politics. So that's my understanding of how to deal. I hope that answers your question.
What is the biggest realization or conclusion which you have made for yourself in 50 years of practicing Krishna consciousness, and what helped you to stay in Krishna consciousness? We know that meeting with Srila Prabhupada induced your interest to Krishna consciousness. What helped you to maintain and protect your Krishna consciousness over your long Krishna consciousness life?
I'm going to put it in the chat. I hope I did it right. I'm using Google Translate. Krishna is kind. And Krishna is always kind. Now, when Krishna closes one door, he always opens another. That never changes. So, once I understood who Prabhupada was, once I understood the power of the holy name, then whatever happened doesn't bother me. I'll give an example. I told you the story about in New York City, what happened in the 70s. Just like some of you have had your COVID vaccine. So I got a vaccine then. It wasn't a medical vaccine. But after seeing the craziest thing you can imagine a temple president's wife trying to offer chicken to Radha Govinda. So crazy. So after seeing that and seeing how Prabhupada dealt with it, nothing that ever happened after that ever took away my faith. I was thinking, why, Krishna, are you putting me in the middle of this mess? I'm just a bhakta. People coming to my apartment, trying to bloop, blah, blah, blah. Why are you putting me here? Because Krishna gave me a vaccine better than a COVID vaccine. No matter what happens, my faith will never be disturbed. And I can share that with you. So also, if we do not keep reading the books and stay philosophically sound, philosophically strong, then we can drift away. So Prabhupada insisted that we keep asking questions, reading books, trying to understand deeper, and then we'll never leave. I'll never leave. I pray Krishna never kicks me away.
Thank you very much for your realization. We have one more question from devotee. If a devotee is at the stage of Shraddha and Sattvasanga, the stage of developing his faith and developing relationships with devotees, what can be recommended for him at these stages? What do you think, how corresponds the activity, the engagement of devotee and his stage of progress in devotional service?
A very nice question, and I studied this. I took Prabhupada's Veda base, which has all of his letters and books and chorus and lectures in it. And I started counting one phrase. And I stopped at 150 times. So Prabhupada said this one thing 150 times. If Prabhupada said it 150 times, it must be very important. And here is what he said 150 times or more. Krishna consciousness is a gradual process. Some people think when they get initiated, now I'm a pure devotee, and then they disappear the next day. You've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. They get initiated one day and the next day they're gone. It's called pure devotee syndrome. We have to be humble. We have to admit our weakness and it's a gradual process. So if somebody comes and they're not ready for a higher surrender, then give them some prasadam, give them some books, and above all, most important, be their friend. Now, you may find this surprising, but I'll tell you who one of my best friends is. He lives in my town nearby me. You may find this very surprising. But one of my best friends is Harikesh. I've known him since the 70s. And we get together since 2004 when he came here. He lived on my street, and we're together 2 or 3 times every month since then. When all the pressure of being GBC, guru, and was there, then the Russian stock market collapsed and there was financial difficulty and his nerves were getting very strained. And then some Ayurvedic doctor gave him, they call it in Sanskrit, vibhuti, sacred ash. And the sacred ash was contaminated with psychotropic allopathic medicines. And he did not know this. And then he had a big nervous breakdown. Said some crazy things. He knows that was crazy. And then he left. He got married and became somewhat isolated. Then he moved here. And I always liked him from the 1970s when we did some preaching together. He was a Brahmachari. So we became fast friends. And he's very Krishna conscious. He chants his rounds. He has a lot of wisdom. I know he wasn't treated very well when he left because he was a big guy. And then when he left, there was so much chaos, he wasn't treated well. So he became somewhat separate, but almost all his friends are really devotees. And I think we have to be, it's so important. We just be kind to people. And when somebody is having trouble, we have to be kind to them. That's how Prabhupada was. He was kind to everyone. Even one time, there was one devotee named Nitai. He was Prabhupada's Sanskrit secretary. And Prabhupada said, don't read certain books by people who were envious of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So Nitai read these horrible books. And the books, they're just, I won't even say what they say. It's just nasty. So he got contaminated. And then he's going around to temples saying Bhaktisiddhanta wasn't bona fide, Prabhupada's not bona fide, going around. So Prabhupada only one time ever did this. He sent a letter to all the temples that Nitai has become a black snake. Do not listen to him. So many devotees know this story. It's a very common story. What few devotees know is what happened next. So I will tell you what happened next. After Prabhupada sent this harsh letter, Prabhupada had to do it. Prabhupada must do that to protect the young devotees, calling Nitai a black snake. 1 month later, Prabhupada sends Nitai a letter, and he says, all is forgiven, become my secretary again. Now, Nitai was too proud to do it. But Prabhupada, even though somebody had criticized Prabhupada's own guru, Prabhupada didn't really reject him. He let him cool his head off, and then please come back. This is how Prabhupada dealt. One time, one lady reporter says to Prabhupada, why do you shave your head? And Prabhupada said, why do you shave your legs? Better to have a cool head and warm legs. So Prabhupada was very practical in how he dealt with people. But even when somebody would criticize, he would separate them from the devotees so they don't do harm. But he always, if there was a little spark, he wanted to fan that spark and keep them in devotional service. So we need to have that humble attitude, though sometimes for the sake of protecting, we have to do like Prabhupada did. If somebody becomes Ramachandra Kant and is criticizing everybody for everything, then we may have to send them away to protect. But we do that with a very heavy heart and with great sadness. I hope that answers that very good question. I'm going to show you one thing first, the new headquarters for the Bhaktivedanta Institute. This is our new headquarters in Gainesville. That was donated to us, and we have an 8,000 book library there now. And we're doing some remodeling, and that's where the Bhaktivedanta Institute works. And I've sent several invitations to the wonderful Bhaktivedanta Swami, who said when COVID is relaxed, he will come.
Could I say a few words of gratitude to you? When I was 12 years old, I first met Srila Prabhupada and you on the cover of a very thin book. After 5 years, I became a devotee, and only now, after 25 years, I have a chance to see you in a live online meeting. I would like to express endless gratitude to you as somebody who came into our lives together with Srila Prabhupada and changed our lives forever. In fact, it's big honor and fortune for us to have this meeting, to have this opportunity to listen words of Srila Prabhupada from you. And it's something which we would like to offer you as our sign of respect. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Maybe before you hang up, everyone could turn on their camera for 1 minute. So many nice people. Look at these happy faces. These happy faces are what makes me happy. Oh, this is very nice. So many faces. I even have to go to my second page to see them all. Wow. Russians are such handsome and beautiful people. I can see the Russians have a certain blessing, because when Prabhupada would see people that are very handsome and very beautiful, Prabhupada would realize that they have a certain blessing. So I can see it in your faces. You are all blessed. And like most Americans, my great-grandfather was from Russia. Oh, I'm so happy to see you all. This is wonderful. If somebody has a question for me, they can always write me. Also, if they want to see what's going on with the Bhaktivedanta Institute, they can go to our webpage, and I put all of that in the chat. So you have my email if there's something personal, and you have the webpage for the BI. You'll have to use Google Translate because we don't have a Russian version yet, but that should work fine. Hare Krishna. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Take care. Hare Bol. Nice to see you all.
Jai.
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 Hare Bol.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.